Hello, security pros, and thank you for joining us for today's ESA webinar, IRS Memo ERC Supply Chain Qualifications. Your clients may have been told by fly-by-night providers that any supply chain disruption qualifies them for millions in ERC. Now, the federal government has released guidance clarifying what qualifies for this credit, and it's narrower than what the TV commercials are pitching to you. Alliant Group has been helping businesses with complex tax incentives for over 20 years. Their team includes policy experts and former IRS commissioners who have been properly substantiating ERC claims, and the memo validates what they've already done for their clients. Hear from two of their board members on what they have learned over the years and what your business needs to look for. I'm Daniela Chavez, ESA's Marketing and Communications Specialist, and I'm excited to lead this webinar today. But before we dive in, I would like to provide some tips for those of you joining us on your first ESA webinar. You will be muted for the duration of the session, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment comes to mind at any point during today's session, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ensure that we save some time for your questions with our experts today. We also will be recording this webinar, so you can share with your colleagues and rewatch the on-demand session on ESA's YouTube channel, and it will also be live streaming on ESA's Facebook page. If your company is a member of ESA, we thank you, and we hope you're utilizing your benefits to save, expand your team, and get connected to the ESA community. If you're not yet a member of the Electronic Security Association, check us out. ESA is the largest and longest standing association serving the pro-installed electronic security and life safety industry. Our members are integrators, dealers, monitoring centers, and even manufacturers and service providers in the space. You'd be surprised at the power an ESA membership holds for your company. Get a feel for all of the ESA benefits, including savings on business insurance, training, customized in-house onboarding and professional development programs, peer networking groups, government advocacy programs, certifications that satisfy state licensing, and in some cases are also alternatives to NICET at esaweb.org. One of our membership specialists would be happy to walk you through these benefits and the application process. We at ESA realize your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us today. So, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Greg and Mike. Since joining Alliant Group in 2010, Greg has partnered with the nation's leading CPA firms to help maximize the tax claims for hundreds of companies. He specializes in helping businesses in the electronic security and life safety industries. Greg is a frequent featured speaker and author on topics related to the availability and utilization of credits and incentives. He has helped small to mid-sized businesses claim thousands of dollars in credits and incentives over the last 13 years. Mike is the president of Moon Security, an SDM top 100 integrator with 95 employees serving Washington, North Idaho, and Southeast Oregon. Mike's commitment to strengthening people's sense of peace goes beyond Moon Security. He has served on numerous local, state, and national boards for the past 3 decades. Mike is also the last president of the National Burglar and Fire Alarm Association and the first president of the Electronic Security Association after the rebrand. So, guys, please take it away.
Thanks, Danielle.
For me, it's good morning here on Pacific Standard Time, and good afternoon for all of the rest of you that are on the other side of the nation. So I get the privilege of being able to just share what Alliant has done for me a little bit. And then the star of this meeting is really Greg Knar with Alliant and a couple others if they are able to come on. Just to give you a little bit of my experience, I am a top 100 company, past president of National. I like that. Merlin must have paid you to say that, because I'm the last and the first, of ESA. So a lot of fun there. But my experience with Alliant was I was just getting called a bunch of times and going, you may qualify for this ERC credit. And as we're going through this, I'm also a member of EMP, which is the Employer Management Professional Group. And I had somebody, Rick Seymour from Florida, telling me that I should probably check this out with the ERC. And I had my accounting manager and my GM and HR manager saying, didn't think that we qualified here in the state of Washington. And then my CPA was saying, maybe you should look into it. Well, so I kept putting off the Alliant contact and all for probably good 6 months. And finally, he got through to me, just say, look, let me give a chance, do a Zoom meeting thing, and then let's see where we go. And so we did. And just for the record, you do not pay until I get paid. You know, that was incentive right there just to check it out. The upshot is that we did qualify for some money. And then it was for a small period of time because you could not overlap with the PPP money that we'd also just gotten and worked with. And so I'm, as a reminder, Alliant is a ESA associate member. And so I was able to get them to be able to speak at the full EMP group meeting at a leadership summit here a couple of years ago, I guess. And so at that point in time, we started looking at it again when they were speaking that it could be eligible for 2021, not just 2020. And so that ended up being a bigger number. And in total, I was able to receive 7-figure numbers for my ERC credit. Now, I could whine about it because the fee for Alliant to do all of this was a big number. But I also had to look at it from a standpoint of if I hadn't allowed the process to work, I wouldn't have had any money. So I look at this as found money. And that's a big number. Some of you may not be as big. And so, well, what is it worth to you? You know, so it's just looking at it, the different ratios with the number of employees and all of that. So the upshot is I'm a happy camper when with Alliant, and I feel comfortable with them. I was actually talking with a CPA down in California here just last week, and she used to work with Charles Swager there at California Alarm Association, and before his retirement, and she was letting me know that she refers anybody with ERC to Alliant. So I felt comfortable there. And this one more area of comfort, back to the EMP group. Several of the guys that are on that group that I'm with were using R&D credits. And so I double checked on that with Alliant. And Alliant told me, no, I did not qualify for the R&D credits. And so I felt comfortable there. Not that I wouldn't want to have another credit to have, but the fact of the matter is they told me I didn't qualify. So that to me lent more credibility to what Alliant does and how they've been representing myself and then any other people along the way. So I have been an advocate for it, just for you to know. I get a large plain M&M and Banana Blizzard gift cards as my referral fee, and that's it. Okay, so that's my conflict of interest that I may have to admit to. So one of the things I have done here in the state of Washington, I'm still involved with the State Alarm Association. We've had Alliant come and speak to us there a few times just to kind of overcome that hesitation that people will have going, should I, and different states will have different requirements, and Greg will be able to do that as well. But the end result here, back again to I'm a happy camper. I've been able to help some other companies be able to get the ERC monies. And so I'm going to hand it off over to Greg, and I hope that if you have questions along the way, or if you have follow-up that you would like to do with me, I'm always open. You can email me. I'm sure we can get you my contact info there. And so, Greg, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll shut up.
Mike, thank you so much. I definitely appreciate it. I would recommend the pumpkin pie blizzards from Dairy Queen, by the way. Excellent. So anyway, so thanks everybody for joining. Let me jump into this. I know I appreciate all your time. I know we have a limited time together today. I won't spend much time on this. You get to see me pre-beard versus post-beard. We can have a vote on which one we all like better. That's what we're going with now as we move into winter. So, but just a little bit about me. I have been with Alliant Group for 13 years. I have been working in the area of public accounting for over 25 years. Really just in specialty tax incentives and the employee retention credits, where I've been spending a lot of my time since the pandemic. So as we go through and talk about this, I'm going to point out some differences between what you may have heard about the employee retention credit and really try to separate that fact from fiction. People looking to maybe make a quick buck, and people that are maybe doing things more fraudulently, because we're seeing a lot of that, and the IRS has seen a lot of that, quite frankly. So a little bit about Alliant Group. We've been around for over 2 decades. And that's one of the things that the IRS has pointed out is since the pandemic has happened, there have been at least, the IRS is estimating, 2,000 providers, people that are what they would call ERC credit mills, that have popped up as a result of this. These folks, and I've ran into it personally, people that have no tax experience, have no accounting experience, that are holding themselves out to folks as being experts in this very, very complex area of the tax law. So I don't want you to think we just popped up. We've been around for a couple of decades. We're actually led by really some top former folks at the Internal Revenue Service. The vice chair of our firm is a gentleman by the name of Mark Everson. Mark was commissioner of the IRS from 2003 to 2007. In addition to that, we have Kathy Petronchek, we have Steve Miller, Eric Hilton. Steve led the audit function at the service. Eric and Kathy, both at different times, led a division of the service called SBSE, which is the Small Business Self-Employed Division. And then they were, Kathy was also in charge of the Large Business Division for a while. Eric was deputy commissioner of, or deputy chief, pardon me, of criminal investigations. And then Darren Gio, our most recent hire, was over the fraud division at the service. So I only tell you that because the way we put these together is exactly the way the IRS wants them done. So we're not trying to pound a square peg into a round hole. There are companies that clearly can qualify, and there are companies that have no business claiming this incentive, and it's very, very fact specific. In addition, we have a variety of various policymakers or former policymakers on staff. Dean Zerbe was senior tax counsel to the Senate Finance Committee, served under Senator Chuck Grassley. Rick Lazio, former congressman from New York, multi-term congressman, was in leadership during his time in Congress. And so again, think of this as like a three-legged stool almost. We have the IRS people or former IRS folks that are really leading the compliance part of this. We have people in the former areas of government that understand the policy intent behind some of these things. And then of course we have the professionals at Alliant Group as well that are really boots on the ground, documenting and identifying these opportunities for clients. The one thing I would say about the employee retention credit, a lot of people don't know, is it's not new. It's not brand new as a result of COVID. And I would say the employee retention credit, and I'm not going to give you a long history, but the employee retention credit has been a tool by which the federal government has used in times of natural disaster in the United States. So whether it be hurricanes or wildfires, this has been, or the releasing of thousands of mandates, right, and a pandemic, the IRS is, well, more aptly, Congress has chosen to use this tool to continue to promote economic development, to try to keep people employed. And that was precisely the input and the thought process behind reintroducing the employee retention credit during the pandemic. When we think of the employee retention credit, I often say, this is probably my number one saying related to this, is it is a very legitimate incentive. It's very legitimate. It is full of a lot of illegitimate people that are promising credits, that are doing things very haphazardly. They aren't appropriately documenting mandates and compliance, and we'll talk about what it takes to qualify for this, but they're maybe giving you a series of spreadsheets or I've seen people that have effectively sort of self-certified that really can open you up for a tremendous amount of liability. In Mike's case, for instance, Mike was able to claim a seven-figure benefit, right? Over $1 million in benefit. If that was incorrectly claimed, that's the potential liability laying out there, that I got refunds that I'm not rightfully entitled to. And what would happen if I got audited? And do I have to pay that back? And so those are all some of the hazards that exist if you're improperly claiming this incentive. So when we think about the timeline of the employee retention credit, it originally was introduced as part of the CARES Act, just to give you some background here. So it wasn't after the CARES Act, but it was part of the CARES Act, which was originally introduced along with an incentive probably most all of you claimed, which was the PPP loans. Now, in the first iteration of the employee retention credit, if you claimed a PPP loan, you were automatically ineligible to claim the employee retention credit. It wasn't until December of 2020 that there was a law change that allowed you to do both. So when we think about this, this incentive, if you've talked to your CPA and it was during the early time period of COVID, so let's say it was April or May of 2020, and they said you don't qualify, you claim the PPP loan, that's not true. You can still claim both, you just can't double count. So this may give you an opportunity to get a fresh set of eyes on this incentive, because there has been change after change after change after change after change related to this. So again, the original version was for 2020, starting in late March through the end. You had to have a 50% reduction in revenue and these were quarterly comparisons, comparing let's say Q2 of 2020 to Q2 of 2019. And if you suffered a 50% reduction in revenue, then that was a safe harbor. You automatically qualify. Now, a lot of folks didn't experience that. Now, I will tell you, that is the test. If your CPA said, I've looked at this, you do not qualify, it's likely because you didn't qualify under this revenue reduction test. There's another test that we're going to discuss in a few minutes that talks more about, or in the next slide, really, these partial suspension areas. So we're going to talk about partial suspensions. We're also going to talk about, obviously, the supply chain issue, which has been slightly overhyped as it relates to eligibility. Now, when we think of the changes related to after the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was, again, that was the piece of legislation that was passed in December of 2020. It made some pretty definitive changes to the employee retention credit. The first one was that it allowed you to claim the employee retention credit even if you had claimed PPP. It also extended the incentive to 2021. Now, originally it was all of 2021. Later, we'll realize, and through another passage of law, that it ends after September 30th of 2021. So we basically have 3 full quarters in 2020 and 3 full quarters in 2021 to evaluate this incentive. They also reduced the revenue decline test. If you recall in the last slide, I talked about this 50% reduction when comparing quarterly revenue. They reduced that to a 20% reduction in quarterly revenue. That is, again, comparing the same quarter of 2021 to the same quarter in 2019. The thought being, we want to measure changes pre-pandemic versus in pandemic. That was the thought process here. Also, what we saw was the issuance of the IRS's guidance related to the employee retention credit, and that came in the form of a release called 21-20, which was just around 100 pages of documentation that the IRS released that gave people essentially a roadmap of how to qualify. They dug into better describing partial suspensions and shutdowns and what is needed in order to qualify for this incentive. So in order to qualify under the second test, the second pathway, if you will, we have to be able to prove that 3 things happen to you. And this is critical. So please, if you don't glean anything else from this, take this into account, the 3 things we need to prove, or if you've claimed this incentive, the 3 things you need to be real clear that you can prove. The first thing you need to be real clear on is what were the mandates that led to our qualification. So we have to be under or had been under some form of government ordered mandate. And we're going to talk about government ordered mandates and what those mean and how they work, but everything we do has to point to a mandate. We also have to point to our compliance with those mandates, that we actually didn't take that mandate, read it, wad it up and kind of throw it over our shoulder and just completely ignore it, but we actually followed it. So mandates, they restrict commerce. They restrict our ability to do work the way we normally would, either by social distancing. And often people think of mandates, and sometimes CPAs think, well, I had to be shut down in order to point to a mandate that if I was an essential business, I'm not eligible. Not true. Most of our clients that we work with were deemed essential and can still have eligibility for this incentive. We have to prove that we complied with those mandates. So if it said we had to social distance, or we had enhanced cleanings, or we only worked on emergency issues, people worked remotely, it can apply to our ability to travel to visit clients. It may impact our ability to get raw materials or supplies. And we're going to talk more about that, which is kind of the basis of today's conversation. The last thing we have to prove is that we, as a result of our compliance with these mandates, suffered a greater than nominal impact. Greater than nominal impact is deemed an impact of more than 10%. So our business was impacted more than 10%, not necessarily 10% of revenue. It can be hours worked, revenue, it can be inefficiencies that happened, it can be potential delays. So in getting inventory or materials, it's all those things that we might be able to point to, but it's all rooted in those mandates. Going through these mandates a little bit more, mandates are different than guidance. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. In the United States, we have the federal government, so there's mandates at the federal level. Okay, we have state mandates, and to Mike's point, right? If I'm in Washington, well, my mandates look different than if I'm in Florida, or if I'm in Indiana or Michigan or Texas. They all have different state mandates and the amount And so when we think of mandates, I want you to think of mandates impacting your business specifically, but also your customers and also your suppliers. Now, in addition to those mandates, there are about 100,000 counties in the country. There are about 330,000 cities and towns in the country. All of them had some form of guidance or mandates. Guidance is you should do this. Mandates are you shall do this, you will do this, or face some penalty if you're non-compliant. Okay. We have distilled, one of the early things we did was start in the creation of an entire database that has documented every single mandate that has occurred in the United States. Okay, these have to be U.S. mandates, pardon me. So we have these completely cataloged. There's over 12,000 of these mandates. And that's that is the basis for eligibility here for this incentive. Let's talk about what we're seeing in terms of some myths out there, some reasons that you maybe didn't claim the credit. So myth number one, we already talked about. Well, I claim PPP. I already claimed PPP, so my CPA says I'm not eligible. Okay, so we know that's not true because as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, you can take advantage of both incentives. My revenue declines did not meet that safe harbor, that 50% or 20% rule. Right? In some cases, going to number three, my company actually grew. My company actually our sales went up. And so how was I impacted if our sales went up? Well, you guys can have the same level of sales, or your sales might have even gone up because in many cases your costs went up, right? Things cost more. So you had to pass that along to your customer, which you very well might have had the best years you've ever had. But the amount of work it took to do that same level of revenue might have gone up as well, right? We lost efficiencies. We had delays in our supply chain. We had an inability to meet with our customers. And some of those, while those are very objective measures of, well, I used to meet with this many clients. Now because of travel restrictions, I couldn't meet with as many. Some of those that revenue impact didn't happen in 2021. In some cases, it didn't happen in 2022. A lot of times people are just now starting to feel the fact that our pipeline was broken during that time period, and we were simply working through existing work that we already had. It may be limited access to job sites. I couldn't get into install things because schools were closed. People wouldn't let me in. I had an inability to access that. I had to limit jobs or limit my crew size. So that took longer to get in. I mean, these are all different things that you need to think about that could lead you to eligibility, even if my revenue did not decline. Okay. My company was in losses. This really doesn't apply to you guys because you're all for profit, but organizations that are charities or nonprofits, they often think they're not eligible. So if you belong to a church, you're a board member of some place, keep in mind, those might have opportunities to take advantage of this incentive. The other is I had too many employees. For 2020, this was only for companies that had less than 100 full-time equivalent employees, right? So there's some calculations we do in 2019 to determine that. But if we had part-time people, they count differently than full-time people. And so looking at those employee counts is important. And lastly, I didn't document all of this real time, thereby I'm not eligible. That's something we can also evaluate to perhaps get around as well. In short, if you haven't looked at this, you need to look at this, right? Not guaranteeing you're eligible. You very well might not be eligible. But even if I was entitled to some portion of what could be a significant number, let me walk through the benefit of this. In 2020, the maximum benefit you can receive is up to $5,000 for each employee that you had. For 2021, the maximum benefit I can claim is up to $7,000 per employee, but that's not for the entire year. That's for each quarter, covering the first 3 quarters of the year. So when you get those mailers, you get the incessant television commercials, the radio ads, the emails, the texts, you name it, right? I get it. They must not know what I do because I do this professionally and I get those calls. You always hear that number, $26,000, almost like it's a binary outcome. It's either on or off. It's yes or no, that I either get 0 or I get 26,000. You can partially qualify. You may qualify in some quarters and not qualify in other quarters. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some variables digging into this supply chain issue. So supply chain issues, we talked about federal mandates, right? Federal mandates cover the entire United States. That's the federal government saying, hey, you have to do this. We're going to put out a travel restriction, and that affects everybody, okay? Then we have state mandates. State mandates, in this case, we have Governor Abbott's stay-at-home order in Texas. So we may have a federal mandate, then we have state mandates. Well, then looking through this, we may have local mandates. So if I'm in Dallas, and in Dallas County, I have local mandates related to city government or the county saying, you can't do this. We're not letting you do this. Restaurants operate at this capacity, or you remember, if you remember those kind of things that happened during the pandemic, certain businesses were closed. And it was a layering of mandates, right? There were state mandates, county mandates, city mandates, and then overall federal mandates. Now, as it relates to supply chain issues. So Texas has let's just go through this. Texas stay-at-home order, I don't qualify for because I was an essential business, let's say. So I didn't have to stay at home. But I have a supplier in Iowa that has a stay-at-home order, and I couldn't get those materials. Then I can potentially qualify. Again, we're pointing to the mandate in Iowa that would require us to have a greater than nominal impact to our business. So it delayed shipments, and that overall delaying of shipments caused an impact more than 10%. Okay. Now we take this one step further. Well, let's assume the same. I had a supplier in Iowa, but in this case now, well, my Wyoming supplier that I also get the same stuff from, maybe they have different prices or whatever, but they're unaffected and I can still receive my shipments, then I wouldn't qualify. Okay, because there wasn't an impact to my business. Yes, my Iowa supplier was impacted, but my Wyoming supplier wasn't, and thereby I could use my Wyoming supplier, and thereby I may not qualify. Are you starting to see the complexity of this, right? And it only gets more as we talk about, again, I'm in Texas, we don't qualify. The Iowa and Wyoming suppliers are under no mandates, let's say, so I can't qualify there. But there's delays in California ports that make them unable to get their supplies, then I may qualify. So delays at California ports may make you guys unable to adequately supply those Texas businesses. So where do they get their materials from? Their supply chain was disrupted. Furthermore, if the ports, and this, I don't expect you to memorize this. This is simply to underscore the complexity of this. Oftentimes when we talk about supply chain issues, and we talk about a lot of ESA members, some of the inventory that you guys carry, some of the parts come from Southeast Asia, right? They're imported in. And so if we have delays and it's related to a Chinese supplier or a Southeast Asia supplier, And it's not because the port delays impacted, it's just because in China, they locked down the entire country and there was reduced shipments from China. I wouldn't be eligible because those mandates are outside of the United States. The mandates here need to be federal, state, or local, not other country mandates. Okay, so a lot of complexity. That doesn't mean you're not eligible, but I want to underscore this is what we need to appropriately document. If you're getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in employee retention credits, you want to make sure this is well documented, that everything is appropriately tied out. So let's talk about some qualifiers. I already hit about on this a little bit. The qualifiers not being able to access client sites, that's a big one, right? I was able to get my materials, but they wouldn't let me in. I'm at a school and I couldn't go to the school, or there's a hospital I work in. They wouldn't let me in and it delayed the job. That may be something that can qualify us. Inability to work with vendors, supply chain disruptions, reduced hours, right? Trying to keep people busy. Those are all things that we look at. In thinking through some of the changes that we've gone through related to this incentive, the IRS, as you've seen, there's this new moratorium on employee retention credit, the refunds. I'm going to talk about that in a second. This got a lot of press, right? Which it should have. And by the way, I applaud the IRS for finally acting. I think it was probably it took them far too long to do something because there's so much fraud. Keep in mind, just to give this some perspective, this is about Congress anticipated this being about an $80 billion incentive, right? This would cost the federal government about $80 billion to stand up the employee retention credit. To date, the IRS has paid out over $300 billion in employee retention credit claims. So a lot of abuse, a lot of that's through fraud. So this GLAM, as it's called, not that there's much glamorous about the IRS's legal department, but this is just a general legal advice memorandum. That's what that stands for. Serves to clarify supply chain issues. So businesses not shut down, but suppliers had delays and there's no government orders, you're not gonna be eligible. Everything that you see here related to these scenarios are always driven by mandates, not by demand. So even if you had an inability to get inventory items, but it wasn't due to a mandate, it was just due to a change in demand. The demand went up. If you remember in COVID, trying to buy a bicycle of all things, everybody wanted a bicycle and a kayak during COVID. I don't know why, but everybody seemed to want one. You couldn't find them. It's not that suddenly they stopped making bikes and kayaks. It's just the demand went up for them. And so the supply didn't meet the demand. And that's why you had a shortage of those. It's similar with this. And that's what we have to look at here. It's not as simple as saying, hey, during the pandemic, were you impacted? There wasn't a business in the United States that wasn't impacted by COVID, but they weren't all impacted by mandates. They might have been impacted by different changes of taste or preferences within the time of COVID. So when we go through, and what we did with Mike is went through an employee retention credit study. This is what that looks like. You get a book that looks like this. By the way, I've seen people that have claimed, Mike, you might find this sad or humorous, I'm not sure, but we have found, I have had clients that have claimed millions of dollars, like literally millions of dollars, that don't have a 200-page book. They have a piece of paper, a sheet of paper, or a series of sheets of paper that have no documentation. They weren't impacted as a result of revenue decline, and it's a series of spreadsheets. And if audited, they there would be a bloodbath, right? Just complete annihilation of something like that, because they're not documented, and that's what's required. So when we go through a study, the things that we need to understand is what an analysis of the documentation, looking at your PPP loan, looking at payroll, looking at all these impacts. We need to understand the government orders. We go through an employee by employee analysis to determine where people were impacted and do they qualify. These are all things that are part of a very rigorous analysis that we go through in order to qualify you for this. And all these comparisons are based on 2019 for companies that are not startups. Okay, I'm running short of time because I said I want to give plenty of time for question and answer. So I want to hit on a couple of other things. I talked about this moratorium. So the IRS a few weeks ago, about a month ago, actually came out with this and said, hey, we're putting a pause on these ERC, paying out ERC claims. Not, you can still claim them. They're currently not processing them. They are not paying claims after the date of that memorandum or that moratorium. The IRS has about 600,000, a backlog of about 600,000 claims. They have recently gotten about 50,000 employee retention refund claims a week. So there is a tremendous amount of backlog in the service. The idea, though, is they have to come up with something in order to protect legitimate claims, but to have people not file these fraudulent claims and to be able to identify fraudulent claims. So with this lack of substantiation, over 2,000 companies trying to provide this service, and this, to call it aggressive marketing would be a vast understatement. I mean, it's borderlining on harassment at this point, what you get. The IRS said, we need to come up with something to be able to combat this. I want you all to be really clear. There is a huge difference between, and you may have had friends that have said, well, I got my check, right? I got a check, right? And they equate the receiving a check with the IRS approving or agreeing with their claim. Those are two different things. If you have claimed the credit and you feel like, and you're starting to get that sort of blood rushing to your face feeling that you're like, uh-oh, I'm not sure this is right, we can also help, right? It's not too late to help. We can look at the documentation. Maybe you just don't have it. Maybe the provider has it. I don't know, but we can help you ask some questions to better understand, is this legit? Like, I know they said I qualify. Do I truly qualify? We can definitely assist with that. The last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of money that you got because you were led astray, and then 2 years from now get audited and have to pay it back. That would be really, really rotten. So we approach every one of these as if it's going to be looked at, knowing the vast majority aren't. But I'll tell you, if you've worked with one of these providers, I would say that increases your likelihood pretty significantly. So what does the IRS recommend? Stop, probably not listening to TV, but don't listen to the commercials on TV, right? If somebody from Bar Rescue or Modern Family or Shark Tank is trying to sell you tax things, probably be leery of that, right? Ask questions. What mandates were you talking about? How was I eligible? Like what impacts are you calculating? If they can't answer those very basic questions, please reach out. Let us see if we can help you. The IRS has rolled out as part of this moratorium just last week. They rolled out it's sort of like an amnesty program saying, hey, if you claim this and you want to withdraw this because you don't think this is legit, we're going to give you the option to do that before you get paid. Or alternatively, if you've gotten money and you think this isn't legit and you want to give it back, we're going to set some stuff up they're starting to set things up to be able to do that. And they formalized that over the past that was released last week. So if you're contemplating that, probably ought to talk to just get somebody trusted. The IRS continues to say, and quoting here, businesses should seek out a trusted tax professional who actually understands the complex ERC rules, not a promoter or marketer, right? Not one of these mills. So keep that in mind. Now, the good news and why we're talking. There's, again, very legitimate incentive, maybe some illegitimate people, but that's not to say you look at an electrical contractor that's just under $10 million and we found them $880,000 of employee retention credits, right? The numbers mathematically can be significant when we talk about up to $26,000 per employee. We have another electronic security company, 18 million, they had 500,000. Keep in mind, there's not going to be a linear relationship between sales and amounts because we're continuing to talk about where they located. What impacts did we have based on what mandates we were in fact under? Just one more, custom security company, $13 million. They have 60 employees. They had a $300,000 employee retention credit. So with that, I said I wanted to do this in about 5 minutes late, but I wanted to, I know, Mike, I was doing everything I could. So,
so hey, let me jump in on this.
Yes, sir.
One of the members in Washington State did come up to me at our annual meeting and said, Mike, I want to thank you because I'm getting about 530,000. Okay. I don't know that they'd already received it yet. It did take us about 6 to 8 months before the money landed into our pockets. And one of the things that you said that was really critical, I think, is a reminder, is that when we have, I'm one of those Reaganites, I guess, trust but verify guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So even though Alliant did all of the work and all of that, and then presents that summary in that big book, and it was huge to us, then we turned around and gave it to our own CPA. I'm required to have audits because of our loan processes that we have with CIBC. And so we had our auditor go through it as well, just to double, triple check, so that I could feel comfortable turning in something, because we all, I think those dealers that got PPP money wondered what was going to happen if the PPP money wasn't necessarily qualified either. Mm-hmm. And so everybody was being smart and wise to double, triple check. So I always tell people, no matter what, and you're going to get a good product and report from Alliant, but it would behoove you to have the same thing done with your own CPA. Okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
In our state, just as an example, though, our governor shut down all construction except for public works. It just drove us up a wall. And if it hadn't been for the fact that I already had 2 or 3 schools being built at the same time, then there would have been even more employees not being able to work. So I do have talked with different people in different states, and they have had different requirements. And to Greg's point, is a good one. You may or may not qualify, and they'll be the first one to tell you you do or you don't. And so to me, that lent credibility. I don't know that I have really anything else to add, other than obviously my goal is how can we help our members and non-members alike in the industry be able to have access to some of these dollars. I don't care if it's 50,000. That's probably a good shot in the arm for some of the smaller companies out there to the bigger companies. So I would encourage you to make sure that you look to Alliant as an expertise available to you because of the resources through ESA. I will always, as past president, have ESA hat on and promoting the ESA period. And so you will always have that consistency with me throughout the years. So I always tell people, I was president from 08 to 010. And we have an over under here at my office, how quickly I'm going to say that. So we have fun with it, and they jab me a little bit on that, but ESA true and blue. Okay. So what else do we need to have here?
Awesome. Go ahead.
No, I just didn't know if there was any questions I could answer.
Yeah. So a Q&A question that we have is, what if I already claimed with another provider and I'm not sure if it was done correctly?
Well, the easiest thing would be, I would be happy and completely gratis, right? Just to jump on the phone and better understand. Let's talk about what you claimed and how you claimed it and what did they give you. And we can review that, and at the very least provide questions of, hey, here's some things that we see are perhaps a little bit insufficient in being able to appropriately document this, and here's how we can help. The goal is documentation. Yeah, that's right. That's all it's going to come down to is, again, I hate to continue to beat upon this, but it is, everything is rooted in a mandate. Why did this impact happen? And what was the mandate that caused it? And so if you just got a series of spreadsheets, you got a big number, if you had to sign something saying you certify that you qualified or were impacted, those should all be warning signs that maybe you need to supplement what documentation you currently have.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Another one we have is, if I submit a claim now, when will I receive the refund?
That's an excellent question. So there is a backlog at the service. The service is that the IRS has said, we are not going to be processing any of these or paying at the very earliest after January 1st, right? So that's the soonest we're going to start processing this. Keep in mind, they have a backlog. They're not ending this. It's still available. You should still get in line to get your money. However, in terms of when exactly you're going to get it, I wouldn't be running to the mailbox every day looking for probably 6, 8, 10 months. It's probably going to be that length of time, if not more.
Okay. Wow. All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then last question is, can you still submit claims?
You absolutely can. Yeah. There's still, the IRS just put a moratorium on processing, not submitting. So you absolutely can send them in. Now, are they going to a semi to get to weigh and in storage to weigh? Perhaps. I don't but yeah, you absolutely can still submit them and they will be processed, just not right now.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome.
Okay.
All right. That is all for Q&A
If
questions.
I can say one more thing, Danielle, that I hadn't mentioned. There are some deadlines approaching, right? For 2020, the last that we can amend a return is April 15th of 2024. So the window for 2020 is shutting. It's not indefinite. So if you haven't looked at it, I would encourage you to look at it sooner rather than later, because you do not have an infinite amount of time to get these in if you do qualify. Okay.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks everybody so much, though. I really appreciate the time, Mike. Thanks for all your help in presenting. I think you were the star of the show personally, but
Dairy Queen. Pumpkin pie blizzard.
Well, thank you guys both so much for your time today and for such an informative webinar. Thank you to everybody who joined today as well to listen to these guys share their knowledge and expertise. Like I mentioned at the very start of this webinar, if you missed out or you would like to share this with your colleagues, it will be available on ESA's YouTube channel. So yeah, any closing remarks, guys, before we close off today?
None currently. I mean, again, I would encourage you, please, if you have questions, please reach out. We're happy to talk through it. That doesn't, it's always free to talk to us. And if nothing else, just to set you in the right direction, would be my pleasure. Would be happy to do so.
Join ESA, get involved with EMP.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and great upcoming weekend. And same as well to everybody who joined. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.